It's around 2 a.m., and while everyone is sleeping in South Bend, a blacked-out car is speeding through the city's streets. Inside are 5 members of the criminal gang known as Choppa Boys. They're carrying handguns, flashlights, and even an AR-15. At around 2:15 a.m., the car stops in front of their target's house, and the 5 masked men jump out of their vehicle. They violently break through the door, which wakes up the homeowner and his partner on the second floor. After a short fight, the homeowner is immobilized on the floor and his partner is caught in the bedroom. Over the next few hours, the pair is tied to a chair and interrogated to reveal the location of their secret stash. The victim is questioned rather intensively and even receives a bullet in his leg during the interrogation. Eventually, the homeowner gives in and leads them to the safe, which contains tens of thousands of dollars in cash, a few bricks of drugs, and hundreds of illegal pills. But just as the gang leaves the house with their loot, one of the neighbors realizes what's happening and calls the police. When the authorities arrive, they find a completely ravaged house, 2 people tied up, and a bunch of drugs laying around the house. However, nobody could have expected that this incident was part of a complex web of crime, fraud, and deceit that would lead the FBI straight to the mastermind of one of the biggest crypto hacks the world had ever seen. It's late at night, and a young couple sits inside their car. They're waiting for someone to pick up a backpack they've got. However, as the minutes go by, nobody shows up. But just as they're about to leave, 2 men approach their vehicle and signal for them to exit the car. The couple doesn't know the men and reluctantly steps out of their vehicle, when suddenly another man appears with an AK-47. At the same time, the other 2 men take out handguns and order the couple to open the car's trunk. Inside is a backpack full of money. Specifically, it's $250,000 in cash, which the men take into their car before speeding away. Interestingly, with a license plate from Indiana. The pair immediately reports the theft to the authorities, and only a few minutes later, the suspect's car is spotted by state police, who instantly begin a high-speed chase until 2 suspects unexpectedly bail out of the car. The men try to run through the dark alleyways, but are eventually captured. In their car, the authorities find a bunch of jewelry, handguns, and an AK-47. However, the bag full of money is missing. Instead, the police find a wallet belonging to a man called Marco Fernandez, who probably disappeared with the money. In any event, Fernandez is also arrested a few days later, though he doesn't have the money at that time. Interestingly, these 3 men are part of a gang called the Choppa Boys, and it turns out that they also were part of the brutal robbery that happened on the 9th of June. It seemed as if the case was finally closed for good, but when the couple whose money had been stolen was brought in for questioning, things started to get weird. When asked about the money, one of the 2 accidentally tells them just how much cash was stolen, which prompts the officers to question why they were in a dark alley with $250,000 in the first place. The couple, now visibly nervous, explains that the cash was earned through various construction jobs in California over the last year. The officer finds it suspicious and calls up his partner to help question the 2, but just as he arrives, the pair decides to leave. Something about all of this was extremely strange and led the authorities to open an investigation into the situation, including both the thieves and the couple. And just as they thought, nothing about what the pair said was true. There was no proof of income, no proof of working in California, nor anything else that could explain the amount of money that they had with them. A few weeks later, the authorities finally decided to interrogate the couple, and even though they knew the pair had lied, they had no idea just how weird the truth would truly be. The couple revealed that the money was actually the result of a 2-year-long online fraud operation orchestrated by a man named Robert Powell. According to the pair, Powell had been buying PayPal accounts on the dark web. He would then transfer funds from these accounts to dummy accounts using additional stolen information purchased from illegal websites. Finally, Powell would employ money mules, like the couple, to send the stolen funds from the fake PayPal accounts into their personal bank accounts, which they would go on to withdraw as cash and give to Powell for a percentage. More interesting when the criminals told the police just how much money was being made, stating that they knew of at least $1.3 million in the last 2 years. There was just one problem. Nobody knew who Robert Powell really was, at least for now. Either way, the authorities believed that there might be a connection between the Choppa boys and the mysterious Robert Powell. And just as they thought, the criminals confirmed the couple's story, adding that the robbery had also been orchestrated by Robert Powell, who allegedly wanted to gain influence with the gang. And once this was revealed, the authorities quickly changed the focus of their investigation, making Powell their new main target. It's the middle of the day, and a group of 3 fraudsters connect with each other in real life. They initially know each other only by their online personas, Elswapo 1, M, and Punslayer. All 3 reside in the US, and although it's unclear how they came together, they all specialize in one thing: social engineering. And Elswapo 1, as his name suggests, is also highly experienced in SIM swapping. Either way, the 3 begin planning their first SIM swap, and when they discuss money mules for the cash out, Elswapo 1 claims to already have a network of money mules at his disposal. Later in the day, Elswapo reaches out to a very particular set of money mules and asks them to join his new scheme. Interestingly, these money mules are none other than the ones that had been set up by Robert Powell earlier, and of course, this makes Elswapo 1 none other than Powell himself. However, the couple, which was cooperating with the police at this point, begins asking him a bunch of suspicious questions, leading to Powell cutting them off in the event that they had been compromised. This was a major loss for the police, but even worse, since Powell realized that something was off, he started to cover his tracks, both online and offline. He knew something was wrong and wanted to cut ties to any previous scams. But at the same time that Powell was trying to get rid of his past, the FBI managed to discover a bunch of strange stuff about him. Apparently, the 23-year-old Powell was living in a $2 million mansion in Highland Park, Illinois. Furthermore, he and his girlfriend had a bunch of high-end sports cars. But strangely enough, neither of them had any legitimate income. It's early in the morning when a USPS mailman is on the way to Powell's home. The man comes to his house almost every week and always delivers the same thing, a fat envelope full of what seems like paper. However, this time something would be different. When the mailman exits his vehicle, the envelope pops open and a bunch of money falls out. The mailman quickly picks everything up and gets back into his truck. He counts the money and it's at least a few $1,000s. He doesn't really know what to do and decides to call his supervisor, who consequently alerts the police. At this point in time, everything around Powell is extremely suspicious. People link him to crime. He's rich without a job, and he gets $6,000 sent to him every week. Eventually, the FBI decides to talk to Powell about the money and his overall situation. Nevertheless, Powell simply says it's how he pays his landlord. But of course, he doesn't say just how or why the money is being mailed to him in the first place. Either way, at this point, the FBI has so much incriminating information on him that they had to take the next step. It's around 10 a.m., and Powell is currently eating breakfast when he suddenly hears extremely loud speakers that seem to be outside of his house. He then takes a peek out of the window and sees a bunch of police cars in front of his house, and the speakers are telling him to come out. Suddenly, his door is smashed open, and a group of armed agents storm in before handcuffing him on the floor. As they take him out of his house and into a police car, he can only watch as federal agents swarm inside. However, the only thing the feds find is an unregistered gun, and he's charged with a misdemeanor gun offense. Interestingly, they find a bunch of phones and documents linked to phone providers, and in their affidavit, the FBI even states that Powell was possibly perpetrating SIM swapping schemes. Despite this, the FBI lets Powell go, but decides to keep an eye on him. Nevertheless, the agent in charge of Powell's surveillance must have been incredibly incompetent. March 7th, 2021. It's late at night, and only a few days after his house was raided, Powell is chatting with M and Punslayer. The three are talking about SIM swaps and want to go for their first real swapping attempt. Eventually, they decide to go after a man they found on social media. The target has a public profile and posts about his personal life multiple times a day, which makes him the perfect identity theft and SIM swap victim. The three fraudsters then run an in-depth background check on him and even find his personal address on the dark web. Next, one of them purchases a fake driver's license from a dark web market and fills it out with the target's information, but with a picture of Punslayer, who is a 22-year-old man named Carter Roan. Once Roan has everything he needs, he hops on the next plane to New Mexico. There, he visits the victim's internet and phone provider's shop, claiming that his SIM stopped working. He shows his fake ID and asks for the number to be transferred to another SIM he's got in his phone. Without any further questions, the employee transfers the target's phone number to Roan's SIM in a few minutes. The SIM swap had been incredibly easy and would mark the start of a truly generational SIM swapping operation. However, this wasn't an isolated case. Hackers can easily find personal information, account details, and more info through so-called dark web data dumps, where hackers sell and publish the data they stole from their database hacks, such as AT&T in 2024. Even worse, according to Lookout, 8 out of 10 consumers have had their data leaked on the dark web. After making a good amount of money by SIM swapping normal people, Powell starts looking into big crypto influencers and larger companies. Eventually, he decides that if he wants to be truly wealthy, he doesn't have to go after rich crypto traders using exchanges, but after the crypto exchange itself. Instead of a few $100,000, one perfectly executed heist could net him tens or even hundreds of millions in crypto. However, what he doesn't know is that the opportunity for his dream heist is just around the corner. This is Ian Allison, a journalist for the crypto news outlet CoinDesk, and he's about to expose one of the most significant scandals in cryptocurrency history, one that ties Alameda Research and the crypto exchange FTX to a web of financial misconduct. He's been researching the FTT token, a cryptocurrency made by FTX, and discovered a strange connection between FTX and Alameda Research, a crypto trading firm, which were both controlled by the owner of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried. It turned out that a large portion of Alameda's $14.6 billion in assets was made up of FTT tokens. This meant that Alameda's financial stability relied heavily on an illiquid, self-issued asset rather than cash, stablecoins, or other liquid holdings. Furthermore, he noticed that $5.8 billion of Alameda's assets were in FTT. This meant that Alameda was most likely artificially inflating the price of FTT, which in turn meant that FTX's balance was also highly based on an inflated token and might not have as many cash reserves as they claimed. Allison would go on to publish this article on the 2nd of November.
The quant trading firm founded by Sam Bankman-Fried, Alameda, was using customer funds from Bankman-Fried's crypto exchange, FTX, in a way that flew under the radar of investors, employees, and auditors.
The FTX token has fallen by double digits.
Crypto exchange Binance announced a deal to buy rival FTX.com.
Their attorney quit within the first 2 hours of us setting up the data room. So it was complete pandemonium over it.
Powell, who is involved with crypto himself, quickly notices what's going on and believes that this is the perfect storm to use to his advantage. He then informs Punslayer and M about a potential heist, and all of them agree to meet the next day. Once all of them come together, Powell reveals that he's found the perfect FTX employee to impersonate. Supposedly, it's Jen Chan, and even though I couldn't verify this, it would make sense since she's the company's chief financial officer and most likely has access to important FTX accounts. But most importantly, she's a woman. Either way, M was given the task for the swap. Next, they chose that M should do the SIM swap at an Apple store in El Paso, Texas. It's unclear why that location was chosen, but my guess is because, if anything went wrong, M, a 21-year-old woman called Emily Hernandez, could have easily fled to Mexico. However, this wasn't all. Apparently, Powell ordered a different person to do another SIM swap as a distraction from the main swap. This was most likely Rohn, who was given the ID of another target. Even though it's unknown who exactly his target was, it's likely to have been another FTX employee. Either way, they were planning their biggest heist ever, and just before they wanted to carry out their plan, they were blessed with a stroke of luck. On November 6th, CZ, the CEO of the largest crypto exchange in the world, announced that due to the shady events surrounding FTT, Binance would sell a significant portion of their holdings. This caused the price of FTT to plummet nearly 80% over the next few days, making it almost worthless and sparking an all-out bank run on FTX. At the same time, rumors about insider trading, FTX using customer funds, and weird dating stories from FTX began to spread. November 11th, 2022. It's early in the morning, and Hernandez is on a plane towards El Paso, Texas. In her bag are a bunch of phones and fake IDs. Simultaneously, another man, either Carter Rohn or one of his associates, has just landed at the Dallas airport in Texas, and like Hernandez, he's carrying a bunch of phones and fake IDs. At the same time, Sam Bankman-Fried and his lawyers arrive at the U.S. bankruptcy court to, as you might guess, declare bankruptcy. It's important to understand that once a company declares bankruptcy, it goes through a process that restricts the movement of its assets until it's approved by the bankruptcy court or trustee. This meant that Powell's gang had only a limited amount of time to successfully carry out their heist. That being said, at around 10 a.m., Hernandez is in a taxi heading to the phone shop, and miles away, Rohn is already in the store requesting the swap. Luckily for Rohn, the store is busy, and the employee quickly completes the SIM transfer without any issues. He then contacts Powell, who gets to work. In a matter of minutes, he steals over $1 million from an alleged FTX employee known only as AC. But shortly after Powell finishes the first theft, his phone starts to ring. It's Hernandez, and she's got important news.
I've done it.
Powell freezes for a second. He then uses the information from AT&T and the new SIM to enter the victim's email. There, he strikes gold. The account is linked to FTX's financial control panels. He tries to enter with the details he gathered from snooping around the victim's emails. And it works. He's now inside FTX's finance management portal and has access to hundreds of millions of dollars. He can't believe the amount of money he's looking at, and he gets to work. His first transaction is the transfer of 9,500 ETH, or $15 million in Ethereum, to one of his wallets. And once again, it works. Powell is extremely nervous, but continues clicking. Meanwhile, Zach Dexter, the CEO of FTX's subsidiary, LedgerX, just arrived home. But for whatever reason, the first thing he decides to do is sit down at his computer and check FTX's wallets on Etherscan. That's when he notices that something's off. Funds seem to be disappearing every few minutes, and he hasn't been informed about anything. Dexter then quickly creates a Google Meet call titled Urgent and sends out invites to the most important members of FTX. But this is when things start to get weird. Sam Bankman-Fried and a few other high-ranking FTX members don't join the meeting and won't answer any calls. Even worse, once the team starts to discuss the issue at hand, Dexter is told that nobody knows about these transfers and none of the wallets receiving the money are associated with FTX in any way. This meant that FTX had, without a doubt, been compromised. Either way, Dexter decided to call a representative of BitGo. You see, BitGo was going to be the company that provided cold storage wallets for the law firm overseeing FTX's bankruptcy proceedings, so Dexter decided that they'd be the ideal people to take care of FTX's money. However, after calling BitGo, They stated they'd need at least half an hour, but the thief had already stolen $300 million and was pocketing about $10 million more every few minutes. There simply wasn't enough time. That's when one of the employees offered Dexter his Ledger Nano, and even though it wasn't the legal thing to do, there was no other option left. Meanwhile, Powell was just clicking around, making new wallets and transferring money to himself over and over. But shortly after 10:30 p.m., he notices something strange. Funds seem to be disappearing from the FTX wallets that he has access to. That's when he understands that his scheme has been discovered. Eventually, at around 11 p.m., and after a literal clicking battle, FTX's wallets were completely empty. As it stood, FTX employee Kumanan Ramanathan had almost $500 million on his Ledger Nano, and Powell had managed to steal $477 million. However, Powell knew his mission wasn't over. He had a ton of stablecoins, and these could be blacklisted by the issuer in case of theft, meaning that he couldn't use them on centralized exchanges. But Powell knew this and began to launder, and to launder a lot. Uniswap, PancakeSwap, new wallets, cross-chain bridging through multi-chain and Wormhole. He was doing everything he could to sell his stablecoins. In the process, he lost over $91 million to fees, price changes, and other circumstances. But Powell still had over $300 million, which he had exchanged for mostly Ethereum and other native chain tokens. He also cross-chain swapped some of his ETH to Bitcoin. And to do this, he used ThorSwap and Renbridge, which ironically is owned by Alameda. At this point, it was time for Powell and his team to celebrate. They had just stolen hundreds of millions from FTX, and even better, everyone thought it was either an inside job or some Russian hackers. Nobody knew the truth, and let's not forget that Powell organized and executed this operation while he was under investigation for his previous fraud. So whoever was in charge of surveilling him did a terrible job, and was possibly indirectly responsible for FTX's complete collapse. Either way, it was truly a masterpiece of a heist. But for whatever reason, they didn't stop SIM swapping, and that was a huge, huge mistake, because FBI agent Brent Bledsoe began to investigate FTX's supposed hack and found weird connections to a known fraudster called Robert Powell. Now, since they kept SIM swapping and stealing, it's very likely that Emily Hernandez, aka M, was recorded by a CCTV camera while doing a swap, and when they compared her with the person who swapped the SIM of the FTX employee, the authorities probably discovered that it was the same person. Then, when Hernandez got arrested, she gave up Powell and Rohn. I say this because during the ongoing trial, Emily Hernandez pled guilty, and part of her plea deal was that she'd cooperate with the government. This means she was likely offered a deal after being arrested, which involved giving up her partners for a reduced sentence. As to Powell, he's currently under house arrest and just asked permission to go to Chuck E. Cheese for his girlfriend's birthday, with his trial still being underway. Something that I found weird is that pictures of these three are nowhere to be found, and the case has no attention given the degree of crime that occurred.